Remember to wear your headphones. Enjoy the video.
Throughout the ages, there have been many interesting things written about, but to me, none more interesting than the creatures of the mythologies and folklores of the people. All of these would fall under the same category, that being a cryptid. What is a cryptid, you may ask? Well, you see, a cryptid would be any creature that has had evidence supporting its existence, whether it be constantly being written about, or spoken about, or even just like for example, eyewitness reports. But science has yet to actually prove its existence. Because of the nature of a cryptid, cryptozoology is considered a pseudoscience, just because of the fact that a cryptid technically doesn't exist yet. And when it is proven to exist, it no longer is a cryptid. It becomes an actual animal. A good example of this would actually be the platypus. Yeah, I mean, think about it. A beaver duck with a poisonous barb on its ankle. That sounds like a work of fiction, you know? Well, look at the platypus. That's what it is. A beaver duck with the poisonous barb. It exists, and therefore, once it was proven to exist, it is no longer classified as a cryptid. There are many different interesting cryptids from all around the world. Each geographical location has its own. And honestly, some of them have a lot of similarities. Like there's the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, the skunk ape, even the Yeti. They all would fall under the same category. Well, fall under a more fine-tuned category of the same type of creature. Which is very interesting. Because, like, at least in the case of, like, the Yeti, that's on the complete other side of the planet. It's very interesting indeed. And then a good example, well, I believe that one of the more well-known cryptids, and my personal favorite, would actually be the dragon. Dragons are all over there have been mentions of dragons all over the planet. There are the western dragons and then the eastern dragons. But obviously it gets a little bit more specified than that. The western dragons of Asia are more serpent-esque, and they can fly without having wings, which is very interesting. But then again, the legends describe them as guardian spirits. So because of that fact, on a lore, I guess, standpoint, it would make sense for them to fly. But then there's the western dragons, the big, winged, fire-breathing lizards we all know. And actually, a little interesting note about western dragons is that, up to my knowledge, most of the depictions I've seen aren't actually technically dragons, in a sense of they more specified species. If anything, they would be more so wyverns, because most depictions only have the hind legs and the wings, whereas actual dragons would have 4 legs and wings. And there would also have been cases of, in other mythologies, that some dragons don't actually breathe fire. I believe there have been mentions of some breathing lightning and some breathing ice. Up to my knowledge, that might more so be Nordic mythology, and that has been lost to the ages, which is a bit unfortunate, I admit. Back to how they are wyverns, actually. A good example of how a wyvern, being referred to as a dragon, is actually Smaug from The Hobbit. He has only hind legs and wings, so therefore he is not a dragon, he is a wyvern. which is very interesting, if I may add. And yeah, it's interesting. And then there have been mentions all over the planet. Technically, a Quetzalcoatl, the Mayan, one of the Mayan gods, I believe. They would actually fall into the category of the snake-esque dragon, like that of the Eastern. But it would be more so a worm, a subset of a worm. Whereas the typical Eastern would be more so lum dragons, because they also have, like, arms and legs, whereas the worms really don't. And then the worms can actually, like, if you, like, by appearance, you can say that, like, a worm could break off into, like, a Quetzalcoatl or a sea serpent, actually, which, that's very interesting. Like, and then there's also so many creatures in lakes, actually. One of the most famous examples of this would actually be Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. It's possible that Nessie could be like a plesiosaur, like one of those dinosaurs, because like a lot of like the sightings sound similar to that of what scientists speculate a plesiosaur would look like. And of all the dinosaurs to still be alive, aquatic ones like the plesiosaur would actually make a lot of sense. But I suppose it is also possible that it could be a sea serpent. So yeah, I guess it still comes back to dragons a little bit. Dragons as a whole, obviously, not like dragons as like a dragon. Which, yeah, I admit that is a bit confusing to talk about. Yeah. Alright, let's see. There's actually quite a few like monsters. There is one in Lake Champlain, which I don't quite remember where. I think that could be New York State. But like there is a lake monster in Lake Champlain, and its name is Champ. Yeah. There's also a lake monster in the Great Lakes of Michigan. I think it might actually be like in Lake Michigan. Pressy, I believe, is what it's called. Very, very interesting. But yeah, it is very interesting that there are lake monsters all over the planet. Very interesting indeed. Then the states also have like a lot of interesting stuff because of Native American folklore. An example of this being like the Wendigo or the Skinwalker. Wendigos being turned into a Wendigo because of intense greed, whether that is like, well, intense greed or not, or eating meat that, let's just say, is not from an animal. Yeah. That's a bit yikes. And then, like, there's the Skinwalker, which could be, like, the ancient, well, a spirit of a shaman, I believe, or at least some Native American that has some quote-unquote magic, so I suppose a shaman would make sense, but something along those lines. The interesting about the Skinwalker is that it is one of those spirits, but it also would take the form of an animal. But something would be off about it. And that would be that it has some human features to it, which obviously would, if I were to encounter one, would set off the Uncanny Valley quite a bit. Fun fact about the Uncanny Valley, it would actually make a bit of sense if, because of the nature of the Uncanny Valley, it was created to basically help us humans, more specifically us Homo sapiens. Yes, I said sapiens twice, because we're not just a smart ape, or a smart ape. Well, anyways, back to the talk about the Uncanny Valley. It would logically make sense if the uncanny valley exists because there was a reason for us Homo sapiens sapiens to be wary of things that looked human but aren't quite. Which, it very well could have just been like Neanderthals. Yeah. But then again, in my mind, it would add a little bit more credence into some of the cryptids that look human but aren't, and that maybe some that can like change shape. Just a little thing I thought of, or at least have heard and thought about more. Yeah, so the skinwalkers, I feel like would definitely like set off the uncanny valley. But then again, who's to say for certain unless you've actually encountered one? And actually, there are 2 lycanthropes that are somewhat nearby. Well, somewhat close to each other, rather. There is the Beast of Bray Road, which... Oh, gosh, my US geography does a little bit of work. But it's in a state close to Michigan. I'll say that much. But then there's also the Michigan Dogman, which, sounds like a lycanthrope, a werewolf of sorts. The same could actually be said of the Beast of Bray Road. And because of close proximity, especially considering the state the Beast of Bray Road would be closer to the northern peninsula of Michigan, and the Michigan Dogman is more commonly sighted, I believe, in the upper peninsula of Michigan, so it kind of works out. But it's possible that they could be one and the same. There's actually only been like one Dogman sighting at a time. Like the sighting only had like one Dogman in it. But the interesting thing about the Beast of Bray Road is it's not just one, it's several, I believe. Which, very interesting indeed. Very, very interesting indeed. Let's see. There's also the Mothman. That's an interesting case. It's been known to show up before disasters happen. But the real question is it a warning sign of the disaster? Or is it what caused it? Who's really to say? It's an interesting topic. There's also like the Owlman, which I don't necessarily know that much on, but it's an interesting topic. There's also some frog people. That's not what the cryptid's called. I just know that there are some like frog-esque people somewhere in the United States, I believe. There's also like melon heads, which no, their heads aren't actual melons. I believe it's more so a case of like kids, or at least people, that because of, I believe, experimentation, their heads have been enlarged. Very interesting indeed. Very, very interesting indeed. And there's also the Fresno Nightcrawler, which, as the name implies, is found in Fresno. The interesting thing about it is that it's just a pair of legs with like a torso head thing. I'm not quite sure. The pictures aren't the greatest, but that's very interesting. In the state of New Jersey, there's also the Jersey Devil, which is a very interesting case. To me, it feels like one of the more far-fetched cryptids, but honestly, with some of the other cryptids having some sort of magical power, I would say it's not necessarily the most far-fetched. But anyways, for those who don't know, not the Fresno, I guess I still have the Nightcrawler in my mind. For those that do not know, the Jersey Devil is supposedly the 13th son of a witch. And upon discovering that she was going to be having a 13th child, she was just like, cursed it, and basically said something along the lines of like, let it be a devil. And then some version I've heard, it was normal, but then just became a winged goat thing. But in other iterations, it came out like that, which honestly is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. The people of New Jersey have actually reported like finding hoof prints on their roofs, which, you know, very interesting. There's also a case. Ooh, little fun. Another cryptid fact. Have you ever heard of the Chupacabra? Well, if you haven't, it's essentially known as the Mexican goatsucker, or at least something like that. It drains the blood of goats. I guess it'd be a goat vampire. The interesting thing is, it actually didn't originate in Mexico. Far from it. Well, I wouldn't say far from it, but like, it actually originated in Puerto Rico, which I find to be very interesting. Another little interesting fact is that there has been a sighting of the Chupacabra as far north as Maine, which I find to be very interesting because that just doesn't seem like the area you would find it. I believe there are actually like two different types of Chupacabra. The more common one, which is just known as the Chupacabra, and then there's the Puerto Rican Chupacabra, because Puerto Rico being an island, it kind of would be a lot harder for it to be in both, for the same species to be in both. But that's okay. Adds in a little bit more diversity to the species, if it even exists. Some people theorized, well, supposedly found what could have been the Chupacabra, but I'm not certain. It was, I believe, a dog with mange, like a wild dog with mange, rabid dog with mange, like, you get the idea. But I don't necessarily think that would explain the vampire-esque tendencies of the Chupacabra to goats. I guess while we're on the topic of vampires, like those themselves would also be a cryptid. There have been many iterations. Very many iterations indeed. They are unholy beasts. We know that much. But a little fun fact that I've heard is that the reason why vamps are depicted not have a reflection would actually be that older mirrors had silver backings, and silver is thought of as a holy material. So therefore, it doesn't quite work for the unholy, like vampires, werewolves, zombies. You get the idea. And the vampires have been around a very long time, before the depiction of Dracula that we know today. And Dracula was actually based off of a very real person, Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler. Yes. I'm still not sure as to like all the details of how Vlad became Dracula, but it's still a very interesting concept, you know? Also, I suppose while we're on the topic of the unholy creatures, which I think might be a bit rough. Actually, no. Real quick thing about vamps again. It is possible that the reason why they drink blood is because of the vitamin D that is in our blood that we get from sunlight. not being able to actually go into the sun to get it themselves. They have to get it from others. It could also be possible that, like, because of the lack of vitamin D that vamps are getting, they can also become anemic, which would lead to them being, like, feeling cold all the time. So they're trying to, like, get the vitamin D to actually, like, warm up a little bit. Which, that is a very sad existence, you know? Anyways, back to what I was going to say. Zombies. Zombies are technically cryptids, I believe. But they weren't originally undead. No, far from it, actually. They were originally, like, people hypnotized through voodoo. The idea of the zombie being undead, like a reanimated person, I believe came from Night of the Living Dead. And you can actually tell that wasn't what was intended for the creatures, considering, like, they were never referred to as zombies. And it was a case just, like, nobody knew what they were experiencing, like, interacting with, when it came to the creature. But it's interesting that we can call these zombies when the original is actually far from it. The original is still very much alive. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Let's see. Sirens are another interesting take. Well, no, not take. Another interesting case. Because, I don't know, like, a mer person, more specifically, I believe a mermaid, that their voice is very hypnotic. It drags you in. It drags you to a Davy Jones locker, essentially. Unless you can manage to escape. Which has happened in Legends, but it's not the easiest thing. I suppose while we're on the topic of sirens, I should bring up, like, other creatures from the Greek mythology. Cyclops. Cyclops are an interesting case. Because people have said that they're actually been debunked and it's just like an elephant skull. But there is a very interesting case of a Grecian town that's legend mentioned being founded by a Cyclops. And the interesting thing about that legend of a Cyclops founding that town is that actually they know where the dude is buried. And scientists, archaeologists, or whoever was doing it, probably archaeologists, my bad, they actually found a skull that appeared to only have one eye. You know, like a Cyclops. Very interesting. Now, you know, it's very interesting because they were able to point, like, directly, they were like, oh yes, this is where we buried the guy that founded our city. And right there, that's where the skull was. Interesting. I suppose. Cyclops, we were just talking about Cyclops. Well, the Cyclops, Cyclopes, you know, whatever the plural of Cyclops is. I suppose it would make sense to go to giants after the fact, which scientists, I believe, have actually found giant bones, or the bones of a giant, or very large bones that resembled that of us Homo sapiens sapiens, or at least of the maybe a Homo sapien, maybe a Homo neanderthalis, just the same, like, family-esque relation, I mean, which is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. And I suppose another very interesting cryptid would be the Kelpie. For those that don't know, the Kelpie is a horse. I believe they're depicted to be a very dark color, I believe, is the most common depiction. But essentially, they try to get you to hop on it and ride it. Don't. Because once you hop on, you will stick to it. And you would have to tear skin to actually get off. Which, yeah, that would not be good, not be easy to do. And oh, what happens after you hop on, you may ask? It starts to drag you into the water. It can breathe underwater. You cannot. Yeah. That is not good at all. So, avoid random horses, I suppose. But then again, I suppose with a name like Kelpie, it makes sense that would involve water. Just like kelp. Very fascinating. And, ooh, Mongolia. The Mongolian desert. There are Mongolian death worms. Giant carnivorous worms. Similar to the graboids from Tremors. At least the first stage. I suppose they could also be similar to the sand monsters from Dune. Bit interesting, don't you think? Sandworms. Wouldn't necessarily all be all that improbable. No, would it? Sorry that I'm going all over the place. It's hard to think about the cryptids, like, geographically. It's more so just, like, whatever cryptid pops into my head, I talk about. I hope you don't mind. The Kraken. There's also the Kraken. A very giant squid. People are thinking that it could have just been a colossal squid. Which, possible, I suppose. But the stories of the Kraken depict it as being larger than even the most colossal squid we've seen. But then again, it's possible that we haven't seen the largest colossal squid. Anyways, another one that I know of is the Madagascar tree. It is basically a carnivorous tree that has vines that are practically snakes. And of course, as the name implies, you would find it in Madagascar. Good old Madagascar. There have also been, like, sky serpents, which I feel would be more so the eastern dragons. Very interesting. That, at least in the case of, like, the eastern dragons and the sky serpents, there appears to be a lot of overlap. A lot of overlap indeed. I believe there's also a jellyfish-esque thing that would float through the sky. I believe that's a thing. A very interesting one indeed. There's also the bloop, which might not be a creature. The only thing you know about the bloop is that it was a sound picked up. A sound from the ocean. But from the sound, scientists have been able to determine that the creature, if it is a creature, and not some sort of, like, natural phenomenon, like the movement of tectonic plates, that creature would have to be larger than a blue whale. The largest living thing to date that is still alive that we know of. Very interesting. I know I've been saying that a lot, but, like, these things are genuinely very interesting to me. And even if you don't think so, I I appreciate the fact that you're still listening on. Yes. There is also a creature. No, I don't want to say creature. There's a cryptid from Tibetan lore, mythology, whatever you want to call it, known as, I think its name is the Topa. I'm not exactly sure. It's something close to that, at least. That is essentially, if enough people believe in something, it becomes real. And if somebody were to change the story, it would change the Topa. Which, I know I keep on saying this, but that is a very interesting concept. Another interesting fact, I suppose, is the fact that aliens would also technically be considered cryptids, because they have yet to be proven to exist. Yeah, there have obviously been many a case of an alien abduction. Actually, a little fun fact is that there have been cases of cave paintings that have actually depicted a galaxy not visible to the human eye. And, because of the fact that cave paintings, they didn't have the telescope technology we have today. They're interesting. Yes, I know I keep on saying that. Ghosts would also be cryptids. Yeah, they would. And then there's, with ghosts, there would also be like banshees, things of that nature. Yeah. Oh, and actually, one of the most famous cryptids, I believe, would be the jackalope. The good old rabbit. The good old rabbit that has antlers. Quite an interesting creature, you know? That one is interesting, and it's honestly one of the more believable, in my opinion. Not to say that any of them are improbable, or that any of them are believable. It's just that a rabbit with antlers, it doesn't sound all that far-fetched. It sounds a lot less far-fetched than the platypus, after all. And if that existed, that opens the door for so many other creatures to exist. You know? Anyways. Yeah. There are many other cryptids that I don't necessarily know much about, but I do know their name. An example of a cryptid that I know the name, but I don't actually know what it is, would be the wood booger. Yes, you heard me correct. Wood booger. It's very interesting. There's also the thunderbird, which I wish I knew more about. I will be doing research into a lot of these. I know that much. Ooh, there's a rat man, known as the Rat Man of Southend. There have also been a lot of cases of pterosaurs and pterodactyls being spotted. Which, hey, more case of some dinosaurs possibly surviving to this day. Yeah. Ooh, the Naga. The Naga is also very interesting. After all, it's a giant snake. Exactly. Oddly enough, I believe the Megalodon is classified as a cryptid, which I personally don't get, because of the fact that, like, we know that megalodons existed, supposedly, like, more hard evidence than, like, other creatures, I suppose. But then again, I suppose it does make sense with the fact that sharks don't have cartilage,
which means the only remains would be their teeth. And you can't necessarily say that the megalodon existed from just teeth, I suppose. There's also merpeople, which I suppose the current depiction of the siren would fall under. But they're an interesting case. Half human, half fish. It makes you think. Oh, another little fun fact is that Frankenstein's monster is based off of a cryptid known as the Magician's Monster. I believe it had something to do with alchemy, which is another pseudoscience I am fascinated in. And I suppose another thing that can fall under the category of cryptids would be creatures like the dwarves and elves and orcs and goblins, because there have been many cases of them in mythologies, yet no evidence of them existing today. Which is very interesting, and Nordic mythology does have its own explanation for that. Those being that the elves and the dwarves, at least those two, and the giants actually, have their own realms. Other than our, that is not our realm of Midgard. Yeah, it's very interesting. Then there's also a lot of creatures from Japanese folklore, the yokai, as they're called. An example of this being the kappa, which has a little pool of water on his head, and that's all I can quite remember from it. I know there's a Pokemon based off of it. A lot of Pokemon are actually based off of yokai, which makes sense. And then there are other sorts of creatures, like kitsune, the fox spirits of legend that always seem to have a mystical power to them. Like, they can be tricksters a lot of the time, and there have also been cases of them having like different numbers of tails, which symbolizes like their magical power, the most powerful of which being a 9-tailed kitsune, which I have based a character on which I have based a character on. Then there's also the Minotaur of Greek mythology, which the Minotaur's labyrinth actually is believed to have existed on the island of Minos. It's just a matter of, was Asterius, I believe that's what the Minotaur's name was, or at least that's what his name is commonly called in tales about him. But yeah, the real question is, did he exist? He is. Yeah, like his existence is not a good one. That's for sure. That's for certain. Yeah. It's not good. Not good at all. Let's see. What's another cryptid? Yeah, I'm sorry. We've been at this for a while, haven't we? And I've been trying to keep things more general. Trust me, I could go on for hours just about dragons alone. I would love to, but I'm sure that you're getting kind of tired of this bit, aren't you? That's fair. But I suppose for now I'll leave you off with one final cryptid for the time being. That being the unicorn. A magical horse that has a horn. A single horn, hence unicorn. I'm not exactly sure where it originated from, but I do believe that there are some goats in areas that like unicorns would be like associated with. that have horns like that. Like, I'm not saying that that is where it came from, just like that is one train of thought people have about the origin of the unicorn. The unicorn is actually also the national animal of Scotland, which is very interesting because you don't see too many cases of cryptids, or at least animals yet to prove to actually exist but happen in legends, to symbolize country. In a way, I suppose another case of this could be the Welsh flag, because the flag of Wales actually has a dragon on it, which is very, very interesting. Well, anyway, thank you for listening to me for so long. I'm sorry I rambled on for so long at that. But thanks for listening anyway.